I'm Cindy Bradley, and I'm the Women's Missions and Ministries Missions Education Catalyst for the Florida Baptist Convention. In this session, I'm going to talk about New Hope Bible Story, Multiplying Healing to Wounded Hearts. The vision of New Hope is that New Hope exists to multiply healing towards wounded hearts, equipping and empowering those who have received comfort from God to comfort others with the comfort they have been given, forming reproducing healing communities of people walking on a healing journey together. Our vision is that all those who have received comfort from God will be able to pass that on to others around them. It is important to note that this is not counseling and does not train people to be counselors. We are training lay people to listen to each other and create a healing, listening environment. New Hope groups consist of 4 to 10 people. They are designed to allow participants to tell their stories in a safe environment with others who have experienced their own hurts. In a New Hope group, wounded people can experience community, develop a sense of purpose, and increase their faith as they learn about God's purpose in this world. The 7 sessions are designed to be done once a week over a period of 7 weeks. The first session acts as a vision casting session for the group. It introduces the idea of a journey that begins in hurt and woundedness and culminates in a place of new beginnings. And it offers participants the opportunity to embark on this healing journey together towards new beginnings. In the first session, participants are also introduced to the story of Joseph, a man who was betrayed by his family, wrongfully imprisoned, and forgotten, only to see his life become a means of saving many people. In each subsequent story, participants will be reminded of the vision statement from the end of Joseph's story. Do not be afraid. You meant to harm me, but God used what has happened for good, not just for me, but so that many other people could be saved. Through this reminder, it is hoped that wounded people can begin to see the possibility that what has happened to them could be useful in some way to others. Each week, group members are encouraged to share personal stories that follow a progression of remembering happy times, talking about hard times, talking about hopelessness and feeling forgotten, moving towards bringing troubles to God, and then searching for purpose and a new beginning. Group members are given opportunities to share, listen, be listened to, celebrate, and lament. Woven into this experience is a set of biblical stories that takes them on a journey that begins with God's perfect plan for the world. The stories then tell how sin and suffering entered the world and how God planned for Jesus to take on our sin and suffering and give us a new beginning. Participants are asked to share with others outside of the group what they have learned each week. There are 2 reasons for this. By giving away what they've been given, participants begin to find purpose, and they become familiar with a very simple discipleship approach that helps them disciple others even as they are being initially discipled, thus multiplying the impact of God's healing good news. Because this is a key component of the process, leaders are reminded to do everything they can to help participants internalize and reproduce both the stories and the process. Storytelling needs to be oral, not read, then practiced so that each participant can tell the story himself or herself. The process will follow the same 3-part structure each week, looking back at what has happened before, looking up to find what God has for each participant, and looking forward to what is next. This process can establish the foundation for a new group of believers who meet regularly. Healing occurs as people tell their stories to others who truly listen. Psychologists note that the way people tell their stories often gives clues as to where they are in the healing process. As people recraft and retell their own stories over time, they play an active part in their own healing. It is often difficult initially for people to begin this very important step of sharing their stories. So this curriculum attempts to create a safe environment in which people can share. Participants are given the opportunity to share any personal story of their choice, but in any case, they are listened to by another person who asks them simple, open-ended questions that invite further exploration of feelings. In this process of sharing life stories, the participants experience the healing effects of sharing their stories with good listeners while learning to become good listeners themselves. Participants are never pushed to share more than they are comfortable sharing, and they may stop sharing at any time. Diane Langberg, an experienced Christian psychologist, in her book, Suffering and the Heart of God, expounds 3 vital elements for healing heart wounds: ongoing connection and community, a sense of purpose and meaning, and faith, reminders of God's presence even when he doesn't seem to be there. As people in a safe environment tell their stories of suffering and feel validated in their experience, they forge a healing community. As they learn appropriate Bible stories, they are reminded of God's presence in their midst. And more importantly, as participants learn Bible stories, internalize them, and tell them to others, the Bible stories are woven into their own stories, creating a sense of purpose and meaning in their own lives. In doing so, participants embody Joseph's word that what was intended for harm, God uses for good, so that many people can be saved. Now we're going to walk through an abbreviated session 1. Much of a session would be interactive with the leader asking questions and group members answering. When appropriate, I will both ask the questions and answer them. Why are we here? We are here to talk about heart wounds and how to find healing and freedom from past hurts. First, let's talk about heart wounds. We have to start with what a physical wound is. So let's imagine you cut your arm. That would be a physical wound. Can you see it? Yes. What happens if you ignore it? Well, it could get infected. It could cause additional pain. You might even lose the ability to function with that arm. So when you attempt to take care of it, what is that like? Well, generally, that's pretty painful. And how long does it take to get better? Well, it could be weeks or months. And after it is healed, can you still see it? Yes, because it would usually leave a scar. So now let's talk about heart wounds, things that hurt inside. There are many things that could cause a heart wound. I'm sure you're thinking of something right now. Can you see a heart wound like you see a physical wound? No. What happens if you ignore it? Well, it can fester and cause additional pain. It could even hinder how you function. When you attempt to take care of it, what is that like? It's painful. How long does it take to get better? Well, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be longer. After it is healed, can you still see the heart wound? No, but it does leave a scar. We see that physical wounds and heart wounds are similar, and they do require our attention. We can picture what happens when a physical wound is healed, but we may not recognize what happens as a heart wound is healed. So what does it look like for a heart wound to be healed? We're going to do an activity to give you a picture of what that looks like. The 3 villages activity would be an interactive activity if we were doing this in person. We would actually get up and move around. Okay, so something happens that gives you a heart wound. Something inside of you has been hurt or lost were taken away. Maybe something happened to you. Maybe you lost someone or something, or maybe you experienced violence or betrayal. Many things can lead to a heart wound. You may find that you have symptoms of a heart wound. You might have trouble sleeping. You might begin having nightmares. You might feel sad or angry. You might begin to watch everything around you. You might feel on edge. There's a journey that we need to take to experience healing. The first stop that we make on our healing journey is to the village of denial and anger. In this village, it may be hard to believe that the hurtful thing even happened. We might be overwhelmed by it. We might try to avoid it, but it keeps coming back to our minds. Maybe we have nightmares. We try to avoid sleeping. We might even feel numb. Once the loss settles in, we might feel angry. We might be angry with God or with other people or even at ourselves. We can feel out of control, and we may even want to take revenge. This stage can last for a month, maybe longer, and sometimes you might get stuck in that stage. The second stop that we make on our journey is a village of no hope. In this village, we may feel sad and hopeless. We can't imagine things ever getting better. We do not want to do anything. We may feel lonely and neglected. This is the darkest and loneliest place of this journey. At this time, we don't believe or think that anything good could ever happen again. This stage usually lasts from 6 to 15 months. And sometimes you can get stuck in this village. But slowly, something inside of us comes alive again. This is the village of new beginnings. We are taking back our life. The hurt is not in control of us anymore, and we start living our life again. The weight that we have been carrying around, it's not on our shoulders anymore. We have been able to put it down. However, we're not going to be the same as we were before, but we can begin to think about doing new things and moving on with a life that is purposeful again. So do you want to get to this village? Yes, of course we do. Do you want to go straight from the hurt and get to this village? When you cut your arm, would you like to have had a magic cream that would instantly heal the hurt? Yes, we would. Is there a magic cream like that? No. The same thing with a heart wound. We all walk on this journey, some faster than others, in order to get to the village of new beginnings. Those magic creams we talked about, what are some of the magic creams that people try to make you use? Some people might say, well, just get over it, move on. Some might say, pray. Well, pray some more. You need to keep praying. And some might say, it's God's will, you just need to accept it. What are some of the magic creams that people try to use on themselves? Well, they pretend everything is better, everything's fine. They might even try to hurt others. There are no shortcuts to the village of new beginnings. But what if we could walk on this journey with someone else? How would that change our journey? These sessions are about walking together on a path to new beginnings. We will find people who will walk with us and listen with us, and with whom we can walk and listen to. We will also find that God will walk on this journey with us. We must walk on this journey, but there are many things that we can do to help us move from village to village. I'm going to tell you a story about someone who also went on a journey, experiencing suffering, pain, and healing. Many years ago, there was a man named Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. Joseph was his favorite. Jacob loved Joseph very much and even gave him a beautiful coat. Joseph had a good life. He had dreams from God that showed he would rule over his family one day and that even his brothers would bow down to him. As you can imagine, His brothers didn't like him very much. As a matter of fact, they were jealous of him. One day, Joseph's brothers were out watching their family's sheep quite some distance from their home, and Jacob sent Joseph to go and check on him. While he was still a long way off, the brothers saw Joseph coming, and they said to each other, "Finally, here's our chance to get rid of that dreamer once and for all." So when Joseph got there, they ripped his coat off of him. They threw him into a deep, dry well. And then they sat down to have a meal. While they were eating, some slave traders came by, and they decided to sell Joseph to the slave traders. Then they butchered an animal, and they took the blood of that animal and put it on Joseph's coat. They took it back to their father and said, "Isn't this the coat of your son Joseph?" When Jacob saw the coat, he said, "Oh, my son must have been killed by a wild animal." And he mourned for Joseph many days. Meanwhile, the slave traders took Joseph down to Egypt, and they sold him to a high official in the service of the king. Now, even though Joseph had been sold into slavery, God was with Joseph, and in everything he did, he prospered. Well, it wasn't long until Joseph was put in charge of the household of his master, the entire household. Now, Joseph was a handsome man, and the high official's wife noticed him. She tried to seduce him. She tried to get him to sleep with her, but he refused her. He said, "No, I cannot do this evil thing and sin against God and my master." She kept trying to seduce him. He kept refusing her. One day, he was working in the house alone, and she came in, and she grabbed him, but he ran off from her. And as he was leaving, she grabbed his garment and held on. And when her husband came home, she showed him the garment and said, "Look, this is the garment of your servant Joseph. He tried to rape me." The high official was furious, and he had Joseph thrown into prison. Now, even though Joseph was put into prison unjustly, God was with him, and in everything he did, he prospered. Well, it wasn't long before Joseph was put in charge of all the prisoners. Well, one night, two men came to him, and they were troubled, and he said, What can I help you with?" And they said, "We've had dreams, but we don't know what they mean." And Joseph said, "Well, I cannot interpret dreams, but God can. Tell me your dreams." And so they told him their dreams. Now, one of the men had been in the service of the king, and Joseph said to him, "Your dream means that in 3 days you are going to go back into the service of the king." And sure enough, in 3 days, he went back into the service of the king. And as he was leaving the prison, Joseph said to him, "Please remember me to the king, for I was placed here in the prison unjustly." And so the servant went back to the service of the king, and he promptly forgot about Joseph. Well, one night, the king had some very disturbing dreams, and he did not know what they meant. And so he gathered all of his magicians and all of his wise men together and asked them to interpret his dreams. But none of them could tell him what they meant. Then the servant who had been in prison remembered Joseph, and he told the king, "I know a man who could interpret dreams." And so the king sent for Joseph at once. And when Joseph got there, the king said, "I understand you can interpret dreams." And Joseph said, "I cannot interpret dreams, but God can." Tell me your dreams. And so the king told Joseph his dreams. And Joseph said, O king, your dreams will come true. Here's what they mean. They mean that for 7 years, all of Egypt is going to enjoy a great and abundant harvest. But those 7 years will be followed by 7 years of a severe famine. O wise king, it would be good if you put someone in charge of gathering up the surplus grain during the years of the great and abundant harvest, so that it would be ready and prepared for distribution during the years of famine. And the king said, is there anyone in all of Egypt who has the Spirit of God on him, like Joseph? And so the king put Joseph in charge of this food project of gathering up the grain during the years of the great and abundant harvest and storing it up to be ready for the famine. And so the 7 years of the great and abundant harvest started, and Joseph did just that. He built storehouses and he gathered up the grain, and they stored it up and got it ready for the years of famine. And then the famine began. The famine was indeed severe. It was so severe that it affected not only Egypt, but all of the countries surrounding Egypt, including the country where Joseph's father Jacob and his brothers lived. Well, Jacob had heard there was grain down in Egypt. So he said to his sons, what are you sitting around here for? Go down to Egypt and buy grain for our family so that we will not die. So the brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. And to purchase the grain, they had to go before Joseph. But by this time, they didn't recognize him. Joseph dressed like an Egyptian. He looked like an Egyptian. He spoke Egyptian. But Joseph recognized them. And so he asked about their father, and he asked about their families. And then he sold them the grain and sent them home. Well, the famine was very severe, and in a little bit of time, Jacob's family needed more grain. And so he sent his son back to Egypt to buy more grain. And again, they had to go before Joseph to buy the grain. Again, they still didn't recognize him. But Joseph knew them. And this time, again, he asked about their father and their families, but he was so overcome with emotion that he began to weep. He began to cry, and he was crying so loud that everyone in the palace could hear him. And so he sent his servants out of the room, and he said to his brothers, it's me, I am Joseph, the brother you sold into slavery. The brothers were astounded. They were terrified. They thought surely Joseph was going to kill them or put them into prison. And Joseph said, don't be afraid. What you intended to harm me, God has used for good, not just to save me, but to save many people. And so Joseph forgave his brothers that day. And he said to his brothers, the famine is going to continue. You need to go get our father and your families and bring them back here to Egypt, and I will take care of you. And so the brothers went back to their home, and they got their father, and they got their families, and they moved all of them to Egypt. Joseph and his father were reunited, and they all lived in Egypt together. Now, if we were in a real group together, I would tell the story again. And I'm sure you notice I didn't tell the story, all of it. It's just too long to tell all of it. But I'm sure you noticed that I used different words like king instead of Pharaoh to make the story easier to understand. Then after I had told the story again, we would act it out. Everybody would act it out. And then I would ask you these 5 questions. I would ask you, what do you find difficult to accept in the story? What do you like about the story? What does this story tell us about people? What does the story tell us about God? And if the story is true, how does it change your thinking? How does it impact your life? And what does it mean for your life this week? After we had discussed the 5 questions, I would ask each person to complete a healing activity. Healing activities are meant to solidify the concepts in the story or to intentionally help people work through their feelings, make decisions to move forward, or create a healing community around them. Every lesson includes a specific healing activity, followed by an opportunity to discuss the activity with a partner. Each participant only shares as much as he or she wants to about the healing activity. To wrap up the session, we would look forward. We would remind each other of our vision statement by saying, is it possible that we could come to see things the way that Joseph did when he said to those who had hurt him, do not be afraid. You meant to harm me, but God used what has happened for good, not just for me, so that many other people could be saved. We would then review everything that was done in the session, and then I would ask the participants to think about someone in their life that they could tell a story to before we meet for the next session. Then with a partner, each participant would practice telling the story to each other and would help each other if they got stuck. We would end the session by praying for the upcoming week and for the people who would hear the story. In summary, the goal of the New Hope Bible Storying Group is to get participants to their next step in their journey towards hope and healing with someone, and hopefully with God, walking alongside them. To be able to create a listening and healthy community in which continued healing can happen, and to create a simple and reproducible discipleship approach that helps them disciple others even as they are being discipled. We will continue to suffer in this life, but we have hope. So we are giving hope, unlike those who are without hope. Through the death and resurrection of Jesus, that one day all suffering will be finished. So we don't mourn or grieve as others do. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that you might be interested in learning more about New Hope Bible Storying. I would be glad to talk with you about how you can be trained and how you can start groups in your community. Here is my contact information. Feel free to email me or telephone me or contact me on Facebook. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.